Thunder cracked like a whip across the darkened Montana sky, as Fiona Oakley clutched her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders, her emerald eyes scanning the horizon desperately for shelter from the approaching storm. The year was 1878, and the young woman of 21 had never felt more alone or terrified in her life. Fiona had fled from Boston 3 days prior, leaving behind the shattered remains of her once privileged life. Her father's sudden death had revealed devastating debts, and her uncle's solution marriage to his 60-year-old business partner had been the final push she needed to steal away in the night with only the clothes on her back and her mother's locket clasped around her neck. The rain began to fall in heavy sheets, drenching her to the bone within seconds. Lightning illuminated the landscape, revealing the silhouette of a small ranch in the distance. With renewed determination, Fiona lifted her sodden skirts and ran toward it, praying that whoever owned the property would be kind enough to offer temporary shelter. As she drew closer, she spotted a sturdy stable adjacent to the main house. No lights shone from the windows of the home, but the stable door hung slightly ajar, a sliver of dry haven beckoning to her. Making a split-second decision, Fiona slipped inside, grateful to escape the deluge. The warmth of the stable enveloped her immediately. The scent of hay and horses filled her nostrils as she caught her breath, water pooling at her feet from her drenched clothing. Several horses nickered softly in their stalls, curious about the late-night visitor. "Just for tonight," Fiona whispered to herself, finding an empty stall with fresh hay. She sank down, exhaustion overtaking her as she curled into a ball to preserve what little warmth remained in her body. Her eyelids grew heavy, and despite the unfamiliar surroundings, she drifted into an uneasy sleep. Lucas Wright rose before dawn, as he did every morning since purchasing the Double W Ranch 3 years earlier. At 30, he'd established himself as one of the most respected cattle ranchers in the territory, not through inheritance like many others, but through years of backbreaking work, smart investments, and an unwavering determination that had served him well since leaving his family's failing farm in Kansas at 18. He pulled on his boots and hat, ready to begin the day's work with a visit to the stables. His foreman and 2 ranch hands wouldn't arrive for another hour, leaving the morning chores to him just the way he preferred it. These quiet moments with his horses before the chaos of the day were sacred. The storm had passed, leaving behind a freshly washed landscape and the sweet scent of rain-soaked earth. Lucas inhaled deeply as he walked to the stable, mentally preparing his list of tasks for the day. Upon entering, something immediately felt different. His horses seemed restless, moving about their stalls with unusual energy. Lucas narrowed his eyes, his hand instinctively moving toward the pistol on his hip as he surveyed the dim interior. "Show yourself," he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of a man used to being obeyed. "I know someone's in here." A soft gasp came from the far stall, followed by rustling hay. Lucas strode toward the sound, pulling the stall door open to reveal a young woman with fiery red hair and wide, frightened eyes staring up at him. Her clothes were still damp, clinging to her slender frame, and her pale skin was smudged with dirt. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I meant no harm. The storm, I had nowhere else to go." Lucas lowered his hand from his gun, taking in the sight before him. Despite her bedraggled appearance, there was something undeniably elegant about her, the way she held herself, the refined accent that didn't belong in this untamed territory. "What's your name?" he asked, his tone softer now. Fiona Oakley." She attempted to stand, her legs wobbling beneath her. Lucas instinctively reached out to steady her, surprised by how fragile she felt beneath his calloused hands. "Easy now. Where'd you come from, Miss Oakley?" "Boston," she replied, not meeting his gaze. "I'm traveling west. Alone." Lucas couldn't mask his disbelief. "That's no way for a lady to travel. These parts aren't safe." "I had little choice in the matter," Fiona replied, a hint of defiance sparking in her eyes despite her vulnerable position, Before Lucas could respond, the sound of approaching horses reached them. He glanced toward the stable entrance, then back at Fiona. "That'll be my foreman, Tom Edwards," he explained. "And he's bringing the new doctor along to check one of my mares. They're good men, but they'll have questions about you, questions that might make your situation complicated." Fiona's face paled further. "I understand. I'll be on my way immediately." Lucas studied her for a long moment, noting her trembling hands and the fear behind her brave facade. An idea, perhaps foolish, certainly impulsive, formed in his mind. "No," he said firmly. "You'll stay right here. But there's only one way I can guarantee your safety without raising suspicion." Confusion clouded Fiona's features. "What do you mean? For now, you're my wife." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Fiona's mouth fell open in shock. "You're my wife," Lucas repeated, removing his coat and placing it around her shoulders. "Lucas Wright, at your service, Mrs. Wright. We were married back east, and you've finally joined me after settling your family affairs in Boston. The storm delayed your arrival last night, which is why I didn't mention you to the men. But that's the only way to keep you safe until we figure out your next steps," Lucas finished for her. "Unless you'd prefer I tell them the truth that I found a strange woman hiding in my stable." Fiona clutched the edges of his coat tighter around herself, weighing her limited options. "Very well, Mr. Wright. It seems I'm your wife for now." Lucas nodded, satisfied. "Stay here. I'll bring you something dry to wear and explain everything to Tom." As he turned to leave, Fiona called after him. "Mr. Wright?" He looked back over his shoulder. "Thank you." A small smile tugged at his lips. "Lucas," he corrected. "If you're my wife, you'd better start using my given name." The transformation that Lucas orchestrated for Fiona over the next hour was remarkable. He returned to the stable with a bundle of clothing that had belonged to his late sister's simple, but well-made dresses that had remained packed away in a trunk since her passing 2 years earlier. He also brought warm water, soap, and a brush, directing Fiona to the small tack room where she could change and freshen up in privacy. When she emerged, her red hair combed and braided, wearing a pale blue dress that complemented her fair complexion, Lucas found himself momentarily speechless. Cleaned up and properly attired, Fiona Oakley possessed a beauty that seemed almost ethereal against the rustic backdrop of his ranch. "Will I pass inspection as Mrs. Wright?" she asked nervously, smoothing imaginary wrinkles from the skirt. Lucas cleared his throat. "You'll do just fine. Just follow my lead with the men." He offered his arm, and after a slight hesitation, Fiona placed her hand in the crook of his elbow. They walked together toward the main house, an imposing 2-story structure built of sturdy pine with a wide front porch. "I had the house built large," Lucas explained, sensing her apprehension. "Always planned to fill it with family someday." Fiona nodded, taking in the well-maintained property with appreciative eyes. "It's a beautiful home." Inside, Lucas showed her to the kitchen, where he quickly prepared coffee and sliced bread for a simple breakfast. They ate in silence, both acutely aware of the bizarre circumstances that had brought them together. "Tom and Doc Miller should be finishing with the mare by now," Lucas said, glancing out the window. "They'll be curious about you." "What should I tell them?" Lucas considered this. "Keep it simple. The less detail, the better. We met in Boston while I was there on business last year. Whirlwind romance. Your parents recently passed, leaving you free to join me here. And my accent, my mannerisms, I'm clearly not from these parts. That's exactly what will make it believable. I wouldn't have married a local girl. Everyone would know that was a lie. A refined Eastern wife is exactly what they'd expect of me." Before Fiona could question this logic, the front door opened, and 2 men entered without knocking, clearly the custom among Lucas's employees. "Boss, that mare's looking much better, but Doc says—" The older of the 2 men stopped abruptly, his weathered face registering shock at the sight of Fiona seated at the kitchen table. Lucas stood, placing a protective hand on Fiona's shoulder. "Tom, Doc Miller, I'd like you to meet my wife, Fiona Wright. She arrived from Boston last night during the storm. The stunned silence that followed was broken by Tom removing his hat hastily. "Madam," he said, bowing slightly, "we had no idea the boss had gotten himself hitched." Doc Miller, a younger man with spectacles and a neatly trimmed beard, recovered more quickly. "A pleasure, Mrs. Wright. Lucas kept you quite a secret." Fiona managed a smile, channeling the social graces that had been drilled into her since childhood. "My husband can be quite private about personal matters. I'm pleased to finally meet you both." Lucas squeezed her shoulder gently in approval. Fiona's journey was difficult. The stagecoach was delayed by the storm, and she arrived much later than expected. "I'd appreciate if you'd spread the word among the men to give her some time to settle in." "Of course, boss," Tom replied, still visibly bewildered. "Will Mrs. Wright be joining us for the cattle drive next week?" Lucas exchanged a quick glance with Fiona. "We'll discuss that later. For now, let's give her time to recover from her journey." After the men departed, Fiona released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "They believed us. For now," Lucas cautioned, "but word travels fast." By sundown, everyone within 20 miles will know Lucas Wright brought home a wife. "What happens then?" Fiona asked, suddenly overwhelmed by the magnitude of their deception. Lucas ran a hand through his sandy brown hair. "I don't know, but you're safe here while we figure it out." "That's what matters." Over the following days, Fiona and Lucas carefully navigated their unusual arrangement. He provided her with a bedroom of her own, his sister's former room, while he continued to occupy the master bedroom across the hall. During daylight hours, they maintained the pretense of newlyweds for the benefit of the ranch hands and occasional visitors. But in private, they kept a respectful distance. Fiona proved herself surprisingly adaptable to ranch life. Though she had never cooked a meal before arriving at the Double W, she tackled the kitchen with determination, learning from Lucas's basic instructions and improving rapidly. By the end of her first week, she was preparing simple but satisfying meals that earned grudging approval from even the most skeptical ranch hands. Lucas found himself increasingly impressed by her resilience. One evening, as they sat on the front porch watching the sunset, he finally asked the question that had been weighing on his mind. "What really brought you out here, Fiona? You're clearly educated, well-bred. This isn't the life you were raised for." Fiona's hands stilled in her lap, her gaze fixed on the distant mountains. For a moment, Lucas thought she wouldn't answer. "My father died," she finally said, her voice soft. "He was a successful merchant in Boston, or so everyone believed. After his death, we discovered he'd accumulated enormous debts. My mother passed when I was 12, so there was only my uncle to turn to." Lucas remained silent, allowing her to continue at her own pace. "My uncle arranged a marriage for me to settle the debts to his business partner, a man nearly 40 years my senior." Her voice hardened. "He was cruel, Lucas. I'd seen how he treated his servants, his previous wife, before she died." "I couldn't, so you ran," Lucas finished for her. Understanding dawning, Fiona nodded. "I took what little money remained from my mother's jewelry and purchased passage west. I had some romantic notion of becoming a schoolteacher in a frontier town." Lucas chuckled softly. "Instead, you became the wife of a cattle rancher." For the first time since her arrival, Fiona's laugh rang out, genuine and unrestrained. "Life has strange turns, doesn't it?" Their eyes met in the fading light, and something shifted between them, a recognition of shared isolation, perhaps, or the first tendrils of a connection neither had anticipated. The moment was broken by the distant sound of approaching riders. Lucas stood, instantly alert. "We're not expecting visitors," he said, his hand moving to the gun at his hip. "Get inside." Fiona obeyed without question, watching from the window as 3 men rode into the yard. Their horses were lathered with sweat, suggesting a hard, fast ride, and the men themselves had the unmistakable look of trouble, unshaven, dusty, with cold eyes that surveyed the property with calculating interest. Lucas stood his ground on the porch, one hand resting casually near his holster. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The leader, a tall man with a puckered scar across his cheek, dismounted. "Might be. We're looking for a young woman, redhead, goes by the name Oakley. Heard she might have passed through these parts." Fiona's blood ran cold. Her uncle must have sent men after her. "Haven't seen anyone matching that description," Lucas replied evenly. "Not many travelers come this way, especially women alone." The scarred man spat tobacco juice onto the ground. "That's so, because word in town is you suddenly got yourself a wife, red-haired they say, from back east." Lucas's expression remained impassive. "My wife's name is Fiona Wright. We were married in Boston last year. She's been waiting for the right time to join me." "Mind if we see this wife of yours?" the man pressed. "I do mind," Lucas said, his voice hardening. "My wife is resting." It's been a difficult journey for her. The tension stretched between them, a dangerous current that Fiona could feel even from inside the house. Then, making a decision, she smoothed her dress, took a deep breath, and stepped onto the porch. "Is everything all right, husband?" she asked, sliding her arm through Lucas's and pressing close to his side. Lucas's arm immediately came around her waist, protective and possessive. "These men were just leaving, dear." The scarred man's eyes narrowed as he studied Fiona. She met his gaze directly, years of Boston society training helping her maintain a composed facade despite her racing heart. "Mrs. Wright," the man said slowly, tasting the name as if searching for its falsehood. "Congratulations on your marriage." "Thank you," Fiona replied coolly. "Now if you'll excuse us, dinner is waiting." After a tense moment, the man nodded, remounting his horse. "Apologies for the intrusion. We'll continue our search elsewhere." Only when the riders had disappeared into the distance did Lucas release his hold on Fiona. She stepped away, suddenly aware of how natural it had felt to be in his arms. "They'll be back," Lucas said grimly. "They didn't believe us." Fiona pressed a hand to her mouth. "This is my fault. I've brought danger to your door." "I should leave before." "No," Lucas cut her off, his tone brooking no argument. "Running now would only confirm their suspicions. Besides, where would you go?" The truth of his words settled heavily between them. Fiona had no destination, no plan beyond escape. "Then what do we do?" Lucas's expression softened as he looked down at her worried face. "We convince them. We convince everyone that you truly are Mrs. Lucas Wright, so deeply in love with your husband that you crossed a continent to be with him." "How do we do that?" A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "We start by attending the town social on Saturday. The whole community will be their perfect opportunity to introduce my beautiful wife." The town of Pine Creek wasn't much to look at: a single dusty street lined with essential businesses, a church and a schoolhouse, but to Fiona, accustomed to Boston's crowded streets, it seemed quaint rather than disappointing. Lucas helped her down from the wagon in front of the town hall, where music and laughter already spilled from the open doors. He was dressed in his finest, a dark suit that emphasized his broad shoulders, and a clean-shaven face that revealed a strong jawline usually hidden beneath stubble. Fiona wore the best of his sister's dresses, a deep green that complemented her eyes and hair. "Ready, Mrs. Wright?" Lucas asked softly, offering his arm. Fiona took a steadying breath. "As I'll ever be." Inside, the social was in full swing. A small band played in the corner while couples danced in the center of the room. Tables laden with food lined one wall, and clusters of townspeople engaged in animated conversation throughout the space. Their entrance caused an immediate stir. Conversations faltered, heads turned, and curious eyes assessed the notorious bachelor rancher and his mysterious new bride. Sheriff Daniel Hayes was the first to approach them. "Right," he greeted, extending his hand. "About time you showed your face in town again." "And this must be the wife everyone's been talking about." Lucas shook the offered hand firmly. "Sheriff Hayes, meet my wife Fiona." "Fiona, Sheriff Hayes keeps the peace around here." "Pleasure, madam," Hayes said, tipping his hat. "Welcome to Pine Creek. Must be quite a change from Boston." "It is," Fiona acknowledged with a smile, "but a welcome one. Lucas's letters painted such a vivid picture of the beauty here." The sheriff's eyebrows rose slightly. Letters, eh? Wright never mentioned he was courting an Eastern lady. My husband values his privacy, Fiona replied smoothly, placing her hand on Lucas's arm. It's one of the qualities I most admire in him. Lucas covered her hand with his own, the gesture surprisingly natural. Fiona captured my heart the moment we met. I wasn't about to risk some other fellow stealing her away by talking too freely. Their performance continued as more townspeople approached, each interaction reinforcing their story. Lucas introduced Fiona to the banker, the general store owner and his wife, the school teacher, and dozens of others whose names blurred together. Through it all, they maintained physical contact, her hand on his arm, his palm at the small of her back, subtle touches that suggested long familiarity. When the band struck up a waltz, Lucas led Fiona to the dance floor without hesitation. "You dance?" she asked, genuinely surprised as he took her in his arms with practiced ease. A smile tugged at his lips. "I wasn't always a rough rancher. My mother insisted all her children learn proper social graces." As they moved together across the floor, Fiona found herself relaxing into his embrace. Lucas was a confident dancer, guiding her effortlessly through the steps. "You're very good at this," she murmured. "The dancing, or the pretending to be your husband?" Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. "Both, I suppose." Lucas's arm tightened slightly around her waist. Maybe because it doesn't feel much like pretending anymore. The admission hung in the air between them as they continued to dance, both suddenly acutely aware of every point where their bodies connected. From across the room, Sheriff Hayes watched them with narrowed eyes, leaning to speak quietly with the man beside him, the town's telegraph operator. Later that evening, as they prepared to depart, the sheriff approached them once more. "Enjoyed meeting you, Mrs. Wright," he said, his gaze assessing. "Curious thing, though, had some men come through earlier this week asking after a young woman from Boston, red hair just like yours." Fiona felt Lucas tense beside her but kept her expression neutral. "Is that so unusual? I can't be the only redhead to travel west from Boston." "No, madam, I suppose not," Hayes conceded. "These men seemed mighty determined, though. Said the woman they're looking for ran away from family obligations. Substantial reward for information leading to her return." "How unfortunate for her family," Fiona replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "But I assure you, Sheriff, no one is searching for me. My husband is my only family now." Hayes studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Well, you two have a good evening. Safe ride back to the ranch." As they drove home under a canopy of stars, the tension gradually eased from Lucas's shoulders. "You handled that well." "Hayes is suspicious, but he has no proof." Fiona stared up at the night sky, so much clearer and more vast than she'd ever seen in Boston. "Those men who visited your ranch, they'll report back to my uncle. He won't give up easily." "Then we'll be ready," Lucas said firmly. "I won't let them take you, Fiona." She turned to look at him, his profile strong in the moonlight. "Why are you doing this, taking such risks for someone you barely know?" Lucas was silent for so long that Fiona thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. "My sister, Margaret, the one whose clothes you're wearing, she was forced into a marriage she didn't want. Her husband was cruel. By the time I found out and tried to bring her home, it was too late. She died from injuries he inflicted." Fiona's hand flew to her mouth. "Lucas, I'm so sorry." "I couldn't save her," he continued, his knuckles white on the reins. "But when I found you in my stable, frightened and alone, I couldn't turn you away. Couldn't let the same fate happen to you." Impulsively, Fiona reached out, placing her hand over his. "Thank you for everything." His fingers intertwined with hers, warm and calloused. They rode the rest of the way in silence, but their clasped hands spoke volumes. The following weeks settled into a routine that felt increasingly natural. Fiona took charge of the household, learning to cook more complex meals, tending a small vegetable garden, and even helping with some of the lighter ranch work. Lucas taught her to ride properly. Side saddle was impractical on the ranch, and found himself impressed by her determination to master new skills. What began as a charade for others gradually transformed when they were alone as well. Meals became opportunities for long conversations, discovering shared interests in books and music. Evening walks to watch the sunset became a cherished ritual. Small touches, a hand brushing while passing a plate, fingers lingering when adjusting a saddle, grew more frequent and less accidental. Neither acknowledged the shifting nature of their relationship, but both felt it a warmth that bloomed between them, tender and unexpected. The cattle drive that Lucas had been preparing for finally arrived, requiring him to be away from the ranch for nearly 2 weeks. He hesitated to leave Fiona alone, but she insisted she would be fine, with Tom's wife checking in on her regularly. The night before his departure, they sat on the porch swing after dinner, watching darkness settle over the land. "I've never been separated from my wife before," Lucas said, a teasing lilt in his voice. "I'm not sure I like it." Fiona smiled, but there was something melancholy in her expression. "When you return, we should discuss our arrangement. It's not fair to keep you tied to this pretense indefinitely." Lucas turned to face her fully. "Is that what this feels like to you still? A pretense?" Their eyes met, and Fiona's breath caught at the intensity in his gaze. "I don't know what this is anymore," she admitted softly, slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Lucas leaned forward. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb tracing the delicate line of her jawbone. "I think I do," he murmured, and then his lips were on hers, gentle and questioning. Fiona's hesitation lasted only a heartbeat before she responded, her hands coming up to rest against his chest as she returned the kiss with equal tenderness. When they finally parted, both were breathing unevenly. "I'll come back to you," Lucas promised, his forehead resting against hers. "And when I do, we'll figure out what comes next, together." Fiona nodded, unable to find words for the emotions swirling within her. She had come to the Double W Ranch by chance, a desperate woman seeking shelter from a storm. Somehow, she had found much more. The 2 weeks of Lucas's absence crawled by with excruciating slowness. Fiona kept busy with household tasks and continued practicing her riding, finding solace in the routine. Each night, she wrote in a journal Lucas had given her, documenting her thoughts and the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. On the afternoon Lucas was expected to return, Fiona prepared his favorite meal and put on the blue dress he had once complimented. She was arranging wildflowers on the kitchen table when the sound of approaching horses reached her. Her heart leapt as she hurried to the front door, eager to welcome Lucas home, only to freeze at the sight that greeted her. 3 riders approached the house, and none was Lucas. With growing dread, she recognized the scarred man who had visited weeks earlier. This time, he was accompanied by a well-dressed older gentleman whose cruel mouth and cold eyes were all too familiar. Victor Prescott, her uncle's business partner and the man she had fled Boston to escape. Fiona's first instinct was to run, but there was nowhere to go. Instead, she stepped back inside and retrieved Lucas's shotgun from above the fireplace, checking that it was loaded as he had taught her. When the men reached the yard, she stood in the doorway, the shotgun held firmly in her hands. "That's close enough," she called out, proud of how steady her voice remained. Prescott dismounted, his thin lips curving into an unpleasant smile. "Fiona, my dear, what a scene you're making. Put down that weapon and come greet your fiancé properly." "You are not my fiancé," Fiona replied coldly. "I never agreed to marry you. Your uncle and I had an arrangement," Prescott countered, taking a step forward. "One that your disappearance has greatly inconvenienced. It's time to return to Boston and fulfill your obligations." Fiona raised the shotgun, aiming it squarely at his chest. "I have no obligations to you. My father's debts died with him." "The law disagrees," Prescott said, his voice hardening. "As does the local sheriff, who was most interested to learn that Lucas Wright's supposed wife is actually a runaway from Boston. Seems their hasty marriage lacks certain legal documentation." Fear coursed through Fiona at the implication, Had the sheriff discovered their deception? "My husband will be back any moment," she warned, though she knew Lucas and his men weren't expected until evening. Prescott laughed. "Your husband and his cattle drive were delayed by a flash flood. They won't return until tomorrow at the earliest. By then, you'll be on a train east with me." The scarred man and his companion began to advance on the house. Fiona's finger tightened on the trigger. "One more step and I'll shoot," she warned. The men hesitated, but Prescott merely looked amused. "You won't shoot me, Fiona. You don't have it in you. You're a proper Boston lady, not some wild frontier woman." "I wouldn't be so sure about that." The new voice came from behind the men. They whirled to find Lucas Wright sitting atop his horse, rifle aimed steadily at them. Behind him, Tom and 3 other ranch hands blocked any chance of escape. Relief flooded through Fiona at the sight of him, though she kept the shotgun raised. Lucas's eyes never left the intruders as he addressed her. "You all right, Fiona?" "Better now," she replied, her voice stronger. Lucas dismounted, keeping his rifle trained on Prescott. "This man bothering you, wife?" The word wife carried a weight it hadn't before, a declaration rather than a disguise. "This is Victor Prescott," Fiona explained. "The man my uncle tried to force me to marry." Lucas's expression darkened. "That right? Well, Mr. Prescott, I'm afraid you've had a wasted journey." "Fiona's married to me now," Prescott sneered. "A convenient fiction, according to Sheriff Hayes. There's no record of any marriage between you." "That's where you're wrong," Lucas replied calmly. "Fiona and I were married by a circuit preacher 3 days after she arrived. The documentation has been filed with the territorial court in Helena. Sheriff Hayes received confirmation this morning, which is why he sent a rider to warn us you were coming." Fiona stared at Lucas in shock. This was news to her. "You're lying," Prescott spat. "Am I?" Lucas nodded to Tom, who produced an official-looking document from his saddlebag and handed it to Lucas. "Marriage certificate, signed and witnessed. Fiona is legally Mrs. Lucas Wright and has been for nearly 2 months. Fiona's mind reeled. How had Lucas managed this? When? Prescott snatched the document, his face contorting with rage as he read it. "This changes nothing. The girl still has obligations in Boston. Any obligations of Miss Oakley's were legally transferred to her husband upon our marriage," Lucas stated firmly, "and I'm releasing her from them. Now, get off my property before I have my men escort you off, and they won't be gentle about it." For a tense moment, it seemed Prescott might challenge him. Then, with a venomous glare, he thrust the certificate back at Lucas. "This isn't over," he warned, remounting his horse. "You haven't heard the last of this matter." "Actually, I believe we have," came yet another voice. Sheriff Hayes rode into the yard, accompanied by 2 deputies. "Mr. Prescott, I received a telegram from Boston this morning. Seems there's a warrant for your arrest, fraud, and embezzlement. The Oakley estate wasn't as bankrupt as you led everyone to believe." As the sheriff's men took a protesting Prescott into custody, Fiona finally lowered the shotgun, her hands trembling with delayed reaction. Lucas was at her side instantly, taking the weapon and guiding her gently inside the house. Once they were alone, Fiona found her voice. "The marriage certificate is real," Lucas confirmed, his eyes searching hers. "I had it drawn up the day after you arrived, in case we needed legal protection for you. The preacher backdated it as a favor to me. I was going to tell you when the time was right." "So I'm truly your wife?" Fiona asked, struggling to process this revelation. Lucas took her hands in his. "On paper, yes. But I never filed it until yesterday when Hayes telegraphed about Prescott's arrival. I wouldn't trap you in a marriage you didn't choose, Fiona." Tears welled in her eyes. "You did all this to protect me." "I did it because I couldn't bear the thought of losing you," Lucas admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "These past weeks pretending to be husband and wife, it stopped feeling like pretense a long time ago, at least for me." Fiona's heart swelled as she recognized the vulnerability in his expression. This strong, capable man who had risked everything to protect her was now laying his heart bare, waiting for her response. "For me too," she whispered, stepping closer. I came here running from a life I didn't want, never imagining I'd find one I do. Lucas's hands came up to frame her face. I love you, Fiona Wright, not because of some document, but because of who you are, your courage, your determination, your heart. If you'll have me, I want our marriage to be real in every way. In answer, Fiona rose on tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. This kiss was different from their first, deeper, certain, a promise exchanged without words. When they finally parted, breathless and smiling, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. Welcome home, Mrs. Wright. 1 year later, Fiona stood on the porch of the W Ranch, watching as Lucas taught their infant daughter to ride by bouncing her gently on his knee. Little Margaret, named for the aunt she would never meet, gurgled with delight, her copper curls catching the late afternoon sun. The past year had brought changes neither could have imagined when Fiona first sought shelter in Lucas's stable. The telegram from Sheriff Hayes had revealed that Victor Prescott had been systematically defrauding the Oakley estate, and with his arrest, a significant portion of Fiona's inheritance had been recovered. She and Lucas had used part of the money to expand the ranch, adding new breeding stock and improving the main house. Fiona's uncle had written, offering stilted apologies and invitations to return to Boston. She had declined, her life now firmly rooted in Montana with the family she had chosen. As if sensing her thoughts, Lucas looked up, his eyes meeting hers across the yard. The love she saw there still took her breath away, steady, unwavering, a shelter stronger than any walls. She thought often of that stormy night when fate had driven her to the W Ranch. How desperate she had been, how afraid. She could never have imagined then that in seeking temporary refuge from a storm, she would find a permanent haven in Lucas Wright's arms. The stable where she had hidden that night had recently been expanded, with a new stall added for the mare Lucas had given her as a wedding gift. Sometimes, when the skies darkened with approaching rain, Fiona would stand in that stable doorway and whisper a silent thank you to the storm that had changed her life. Lucas set little Margaret down on a blanket and crossed the yard to join Fiona on the porch. His arm slipped around her waist, pulling her close against his side. "What are you thinking about, Mrs. Wright?" he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. Fiona smiled, leaning into his embrace. "Just that sometimes the best journeys begin with getting lost." Lucas's laugh rumbled through his chest. "In that case, I'm grateful you chose my stable to hide in." "And I'm grateful you found me," Fiona replied, turning in his arms to face him. "Even more grateful that you called me your wife." "Best decision I ever made," Lucas said softly, before capturing her lips in a kiss that promised many more years of the happiness they had found together.